I always considered myself the kind of person who thrived on routine, and my mornings at the office were no exception. Every day started with the same rhythm: the hiss of the coffee machine, the familiar scent of roasted beans filling the kitchen, the quiet nods exchanged with colleagues who had become almost like a second family. I carried my cup through the sleek, glass-lined corridors, the sunlight bouncing off the polished floors, and felt a subtle sense of pride each time I stepped into my workspace. My role demanded focus, precision, and occasionally creativity under pressure, but the environment felt safe. I never thought my job could feel so safe. Until that day, the office itself was alive with motion. Phones buzzed, keyboards clacked, and the occasional murmur of discussion drifted through the open floor plan. Everyone seemed on edge, just enough to know we were chasing deadlines, but not so much that the energy felt oppressive. It was a delicate balance, like walking along a tightrope that only we in this office seemed to notice. I liked it that way. I liked feeling that tension, knowing I could navigate it. And then there was her, our CEO, a figure who commanded attention without ever raising her voice, who could shift a room with a single glance or a carefully chosen word. Our rapport had always been friendly, professional, occasionally sprinkled with harmless banter. Sometimes, she'd offer a quiet smile or a nod when a presentation landed just right. Other times, we'd exchange a few words about projects, her advice sharp but never dismissive. I admired her, not in any personal way, but in the way one admires someone who seems effortlessly composed while juggling 1,000 moving parts. She had this rare ability to make you feel seen, even while keeping her distance, and I found that balance comforting. Walking past her office that morning, I caught a glimpse of her reviewing reports, brow slightly furrowed, the soft glow of her desk lamp highlighting the contours of her face. I gave a casual wave, and she returned it with that subtle, almost imperceptible smile that made me feel like, in that moment, I belonged here. It was a small gesture, but it lingered in my mind, a quiet reassurance that the world outside these walls didn't matter yet. Everything felt stable, predictable, and for someone like me, that was bliss. The hum of computers, the faint aroma of coffee, the soft echo of footsteps against polished floors, they were all pieces of a puzzle I'd grown accustomed to. I had no reason to suspect that this calm, this rhythm, was the calm before the storm. At first, the warning signs were almost laughably subtle. A glance that lingered too long from the CEO's husband during meetings, the way his eyes seemed to track me when I walked past, a quiet tension that wasn't there before. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, the office had always been filled with personalities that clashed, egos that occasionally collided. But there was a difference this time, a quiet, almost invisible pressure that made my stomach tighten. Whenever he was around, I started noticing small things, a faint pause in conversation when he entered a room, colleagues shifting uncomfortably as if waiting for a verdict I didn't even understand. I remembered one meeting in particular, just a week prior. I had cracked a harmless joke to ease the tension over a project delay. The CEO had smiled, a genuine, fleeting smile that eased my nerves, but her husband had frowned sharply, eyes narrowing. My heart had skipped a beat, and I found myself replaying the moment in my mind over and over, wondering if I had misstepped. There were even flashes of conversations I'd had with the CEO, innocent, professional exchanges that suddenly felt charged in hindsight. A shared laugh over a client email, a casual compliment on a presentation, harmless, friendly, but now I wondered if someone else might see them differently. I tried to brush it off. I really did. I'm overthinking this, I told myself. As I poured another cup of coffee in the kitchen, the steam fogging the glass window as the morning sun poured in. But it wasn't just about him. It was the atmosphere he brought into the office. His presence added a silent weight, a subtle undercurrent of judgment. The hum of computers and the faint clatter of keyboards now carried an edge I hadn't noticed before. Walking through the corridors, I caught glimpses of colleagues' anxious expressions as if they, too, felt the invisible tension he exuded. I could almost hear their thoughts. Don't get too close. Watch what you say. Be careful. And then there were the small, almost innocuous incidents that stuck in my mind. A door left slightly ajar, a paused conversation when he appeared, a lingering email from HR that didn't make sense at the time. Each tiny moment piled up, creating an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't shake. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff without realizing how high it was, feeling the wind pick up just before a storm. That I remember thinking, in those quiet, uneasy moments, that maybe the office wasn't as safe as I'd thought. That maybe, just maybe, this calm I cherished was fragile. And yet, I tried to ignore it, focusing on deadlines, on work, on anything that would keep the gnawing suspicion at bay. But deep down, I couldn't stop the little voice whispering, something is coming. And it's not going to be small. I still remember the day it all hit me, the moment that made the ground beneath me feel like it had disappeared. It started with a message from HR, curt and formal, asking me to meet immediately in their office. The metallic taste of anxiety coated my mouth as I walked through the familiar corridors, my coffee now cold in my hand, the hum of computers feeling louder, almost accusatory. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was probably just a routine check-in. But a small voice inside whispered, "This isn't routine. Something is wrong." When I entered the room, the CEO's husband was there. I hadn't expected to see him, and the way he looked at me, sharp, cold, judgmental, made me freeze. His words hit like a hammer. They accused me of hitting on the CEO, implying some kind of inappropriate conduct that I had never even considered. For a moment, I couldn't even respond. The walls seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights above flickering in rhythm with the pounding of my heart. I wanted to laugh in disbelief, but instead, my voice caught in my throat, the sound swallowed by the tense silence of the office. Flashbacks flooded my mind, each innocent moment now twisted in a surreal, nightmarish way. That joke I'd made during a team meeting, the casual compliment about a presentation, the brief handshake that had felt natural at the time. Could all of that really be twisted into something I wasn't? My stomach churned, and I felt my hands trembling at my sides. The coffee mug I'd carried now a fragile shield I couldn't hold. The HR representative glanced between us, her expression unreadable but professional, and I realized that whatever explanation I offered wouldn't immediately matter. I was already framed, already guilty in the eyes of someone who refused to see the truth. My mind raced. How could this happen? How could a single misperception erase years of dedication and professionalism? I thought about my work, the late nights, the presentations, the projects I'd poured myself into, and a wave of helplessness washed over me. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat, a frantic drum echoing in my ears, and the faint buzz of my phone on the table, a small, mundane detail that contrasted sharply with the storm raging around me. I wanted to reach for it, to call someone, anyone, to say I didn't do this, but the words felt meaningless in that sterile, judgmental room. I realized, with a sinking clarity, that nothing I said could undo the accusation. By the time I left that office, my world felt inverted, unsteady, like the rug of certainty had been ripped out from under me. Colleagues passed me in the hallway, their expressions polite but distant, whispers of curiosity and judgment following in my wake. The office, which had once felt like a safe harbor, now seemed hostile, every glance a potential threat. I kept thinking, how did everything go from normal to this so quickly? I had been blindsided, accused of something I hadn't done, and for the first time, the calm I had taken for granted felt like a fragile illusion. The fallout was immediate, suffocating, and inescapable. By the next morning, the office felt like a different world, one where every step I took was heavy with scrutiny. Whispers followed me down the corridors, hushed voices falling silent whenever I approached, eyes flicking away like I was a shadow they didn't want to acknowledge. My inbox overflowed with vague messages from HR, invitations to informal discussions that made my stomach twist with dread. Even the coffee machine, once a comforting ritual, now seemed like a stage where everyone watched my every move, waiting for me to falter. I tried to focus on work, but every glance at my screen, every notification, felt loaded with accusation. I replayed the moment of that confrontation over and over, analyzing every word, every gesture, asking myself, was there something I said? Or did that could have been misread? The answer, I knew, was no, but knowing it didn't change how powerless I felt. The sense of control I had taken for granted had evaporated, leaving me exposed in ways I hadn't experienced since my first day on the job. Even casual interactions became a minefield. A friendly nod from a colleague could now be misinterpreted. A laugh too loud might be seen as defiance. I felt every eye in the office on me, every whispered comment magnified in my mind until it felt like the walls themselves were conspiring against me. The air seemed colder, harsher, and I caught myself walking faster, shoulders hunched, trying to disappear in plain sight. I remember sitting alone in the break room one afternoon, the hum of the refrigerator and the drip of the coffee machine loud enough to fill the silence. I held my cup in both hands, the warmth doing nothing to ease the chill inside me. The thought of losing my job, or worse, my reputation, loomed like a shadow I couldn't shake. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, each anxious thought feeding the next. I had dedicated years to building a career, to proving myself, and now it felt like everything could be erased in a single, cruel accusation. At 18 night, I'd replay conversations. In my apartment, the quiet punctuated only by the faint hum of the city outside. Every reflection brought anger, fear, and a gnawing sense of injustice. I remembered the trust one had felt, the sense of belonging I had once taken for granted, and it all seemed like a cruel joke. I began doubting myself, questioning my judgment, wondering if I had missed signs, if I had somehow caused this nightmare. The weight of uncertainty pressed down so heavily I could barely breathe. And yet, beneath the fear, a small spark of determination began to flicker. The accusation felt like a trap, yes, but I refused to be defined by it. Somewhere, deep inside, I knew I had to fight, to prove that my integrity hadn't been compromised, and to reclaim the safety I had once taken for granted. The office might have become a battlefield overnight, but I wasn't ready to surrender. It was late one evening when I realized that waiting passively wasn't going to protect me. The office was nearly empty, the soft hum of computers echoing. Through the deserted corridors, fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the polished floors. I sat at my desk, staring at my reflection in the darkened computer screen, and felt a surge of clarity. If I didn't take control of this situation, no one else would. I had to act, to gather proof, to show that the accusation was baseless. I couldn't rely on words alone. I needed evidence. The first step was revisiting every interaction I'd had with the CEO. Emails, messages, calendar invites. I combed through them all, looking for patterns, for anything that could corroborate my professionalism and innocence. Each click of the mouse echoed like a drumbeat, the quiet office amplifying my focus. There were moments of frustration, too. Old emails that seemed innocuous now felt like potential weapons against me, sentences I had written so casually suddenly appearing in a distorted light. But I pushed forward, knowing that hesitation would only let fear win. That I also began quietly observing the CEO's husband, noticing how he interacted with the office, the subtle ways he tried to exert control. There was a pattern, a subtle overreach that now became clearer under scrutiny. Flashbacks of past meetings played through my mind. The times he had inserted himself unnecessarily, the moments when his eyes lingered a little too long, the tiny signs I had dismissed. These weren't just coincidences. They were breadcrumbs I could follow to uncover the truth. I remember the smell of paper and ink as I took notes, the scratch of my pen against the notepad blending with the soft hum of the office. I organized everything meticulously, knowing that clarity and structure were my only allies. Late nights bled into early mornings, caffeine-fueled and anxiety-laden, but each small discovery fueled my determination. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was reclaiming a sense of agency that had been stolen from me. And yet, amidst the tension and the long hours, there was a flicker of hope. I remembered past challenges, times when I had faced pressure and emerged stronger. Those memories became a quiet mantra. I am capable. I am prepared. I will not be defined by someone else's assumptions. For the first time since the accusation, I felt a sliver of empowerment, the realization that I wasn't helpless. By the time I left the office that night, the city lights glowing faintly through the windows, I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and resolve. The storm that had descended upon me was far from over, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it head-on. I had a plan, a path forward, and the quiet knowledge that I wasn't alone in this fight. Whatever came next, I knew I wouldn't let fear dictate my story. I never expected that the breakthrough would hit me so suddenly, in the quietest moment of all. It was late, The office nearly empty, the faint hum of the air conditioning mingling with the distant sounds of the city outside. My desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across my scattered notes and folders, highlighting a chaos I had slowly transformed into order. I was cross-referencing emails with meeting schedules when I stumbled across something that made my chest tighten and my fingers freeze mid-scroll. There it was, an email thread I hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath layers of routine communication, that revealed exactly what had been going on. The CEO's husband had been misrepresenting my actions, twisting innocent interactions into something sinister for reasons that weren't immediately clear. My heart raced as I read each line, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and anger flooding through me. The calm I had once felt was gone, replaced by a surge of adrenaline that sharpened every sense. The hum of the computers seemed louder, the soft click of my pen marking notes felt almost triumphant, and even the smell of the late-night office, stale coffee and paper, seemed invigorating rather than oppressive. I couldn't help but flash back to every moment he had shadowed me, every accusing glance, every hushed conversation behind closed doors. The memory of the HR meeting where I had been confronted came rushing back, the icy tension, the metallic taste of fear, the pounding of my own heart. And now, seeing this proof, it all made sense. The pieces fell into place, like a puzzle I hadn't known I was assembling. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't misstepped. The accusation had been entirely fabricated, that a mix of emotions surged within me. Relief, yes, but also a simmering anger. Anger at the audacity of someone to manipulate the truth, to attempt to dismantle my life and career with lies. Anger at the helplessness I had felt, the nights of tossing and turning, the quiet fear that had settled in my chest like a stone. But above all, there was clarity. I finally had the leverage I needed, the undeniable evidence that could turn the tables. Visually, it all unfolded in my mind like a cinematic moment. Me, hunched over my desk, the city lights casting shadows. On the walls, fingers trembling as I saved every file, screenshot every message, organizing the proof with meticulous care. I imagined the confrontation ahead, the vindication I would finally demand, and the sense of justice that had seemed so distant just days before now felt within reach. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself a deep, steadying breath. The storm hadn't ended, not by a long shot, but I now knew I wasn't powerless. The accusation that had loomed over me like a dark cloud could be challenged, and perhaps, finally, the truth would be seen. The day of the confrontation arrived with a tension I could feel in my bones. The office seemed quieter than usual, as if everyone knew something monumental was about to happen but didn't dare speak. My hands were slightly clammy, heart hammering with anticipation and fear, but I carried the folder of evidence like a shield, my proof of innocence and resilience. I could feel every step echo in the polished corridor as I approached the boardroom, the hum of the air conditioning mingling with the faint scent of polished wood and leather. When I entered, the CEO was seated at the head of the table, her eyes calm but sharp, reading me like an open book. Her husband sat beside her, exuding the same icy, judgmental presence that had haunted me for weeks. The HR representative was there too, hovering on the edge, professional but tense. I set the folder down, feeling its weight, a tangible manifestation of my weeks of anxiety, late nights, and careful investigation. My hands shook slightly, and I had to take a slow, deliberate breath to steady myself. I began to speak, my voice firm but measured, recounting the accusation, the fallout, and the discovery that had changed everything. I watched their faces, searching for any flicker of doubt or recognition of the truth. My heart raced as I laid out the evidence, each document, email, and message a piece of undeniable proof. There were moments when I faltered, my throat tightening, but the clarity of what I had uncovered pushed me forward. The metallic taste of adrenaline was sharp on my tongue, and I felt the raw vulnerability of exposing myself while demanding justice. The CEO's husband shifted uncomfortably, his confident mask cracking as the undeniable facts settled over him. Like a cold wave, I noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted, avoiding mine, and for the first time, I felt the scales tipping. The power dynamic that had loomed over me for weeks began to shift, and it was intoxicating. in a way I hadn't expected. Flashbacks of the accusatory glare, the whispered suspicions, and the heavy sense of betrayal fueled my resolve, reminding me why I had fought so hard to reach this moment. The CEO leaned back, her expression unreadable for a long, tense beat. Before she finally spoke, the room seemed to shrink, every sound amplified, the soft rustle of papers, the faint creak of chairs, the distant hum of the city outside. When she acknowledged the truth, confirming my innocence and condemning her husband's interference, a wave of relief and vindication crashed through me. My shoulders relaxed, my breath coming easier, and the storm I had been trapped in for weeks began to break. That I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, the city lights spilling through the glass walls like a quiet promise. I had faced the storm, armed only with truth and determination, and I had emerged not just unbroken, but stronger. The confrontation hadn't just been about clearing my name. It had been about reclaiming control over my life, my career, and my sense of self. The moment my innocence was finally acknowledged felt surreal, almost like waking from a nightmare that had lasted far too long. The tension that had weighed on my shoulders for weeks lifted in a rush, replaced by a sense of relief so intense it was almost dizzying. The CEO's husband sat there, silent, cornered by the undeniable truth, while colleagues who had kept their distance now offered hesitant nods, apologies, or awkward smiles. I realized how much I had longed for this moment, not just to be believed, but to reclaim the respect that had been unfairly stripped from me. I remember walking back through the office corridors afterward, the hum of activity now a comforting background rather than a source of anxiety. The polished floors reflected the late afternoon light, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to notice the small, mundane details that had once brought me joy: the scent of freshly brewed coffee, the soft rustle of papers, the quiet laughter of colleagues returning to their work. Each step I took felt lighter, as though I was shedding weeks of fear and doubt with every movement. Flashbacks of the past days surged unexpectedly. The cold, tense meetings with HR, the oppressive weight of suspicion, the nights spent questioning my worth, contrasted sharply with the relief of this vindication. I remembered gripping my desk late at night, trying to steady my racing thoughts, and I realized how far I had come. That fear, that helplessness, had pushed me to uncover the truth, to stand up for myself, and to assert my dignity. The victory wasn't just in proving I was right. It was in proving to myself that I could endure, persevere, and confront injustice head-on. The CEO's subtle nod of acknowledgement felt like more than professional validation. It was recognition that I had maintained my integrity in the face of something cruel and unfair. For the first time, I felt seen not for a misperceived action or a rumor, but for the person I truly was: competent, professional, and unwavering. Even the colleagues who had whispered behind my back seemed to regard me differently now. Their glances tinged with respect rather than doubt. As I left the office that evening, the sun casting long shadows across the city streets, I felt a quiet, profound sense of empowerment. I had been through fear, accusation, and betrayal, and emerged with my truth intact. The vindication didn't erase the pain, nor did it make the past weeks disappear, but it affirmed something far more important. I had control over my story, my career, and my sense of self. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel that release of tension, and to finally envision a future where my worth was recognized, not questioned. In the quiet that followed the storm, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened: the accusation, the fear, the fight to prove myself, and finally, the vindication. Sitting alone in my apartment, the soft hum of the city outside my window, I let myself replay the weeks of tension and doubt. Each memory was sharp and vivid: the cold, fluorescent-lit boardrooms, the hushed whispers, the pounding of my heart whenever his presence loomed too close. I realized just how fragile the sense of security I had once taken for granted really was, and how quickly it could be shattered by suspicion and lies. There were moments of self-reproach too. I kept thinking, could I have noticed it sooner? Could I have prevented this somehow? But those thoughts were fleeting, replaced by the recognition that no amount of foresight could have prepared me for someone so determined to manipulate perception. Instead, I focused on the lessons this ordeal had given me: resilience, patience, and the undeniable power of truth. I understood now that fear can be paralyzing, but it can also sharpen your focus, forcing you to see patterns and uncover realities you might otherwise ignore. That I also reflected on the people around me, the colleagues who had whispered, the friends who had offered quiet support, and even the CEO herself. Their reactions, or lack thereof, had shaped my journey, showing me who truly valued integrity and who was merely performative in their professionalism. The subtle lessons lingered: trust cautiously, but stand firmly when it matters. Your reputation is precious, but your self-respect is priceless. The sensory details of those reflections were vivid. I could still feel the rough texture of the notepad where I documented evidence, the faint smell of coffee that had accompanied late-night strategy sessions, the quiet hum of the office that had once felt oppressive but now seemed like a battlefield I had survived. These small, tactile memories reminded me of the effort, perseverance, and courage it had taken to emerge intact. And as I sat there, gazing at the soft glow of the city lights, I began to reconcile with the emotional scars left behind. The ordeal had tested me, shaken me, and forced me to confront fear, doubt, and anger. Yet, it had also revealed an inner strength I hadn't fully acknowledged before. I realized that while the storm had left its mark, it had also forged a clarity and resolve I would carry forward. I understood that life could be unpredictable and unjust, but I had learned that facing challenges with integrity and courage could redefine not only how others saw me, but also how I saw myself. By the time I returned to the office in the weeks following the ordeal, I felt different, stronger, more grounded, and acutely aware of the boundaries I needed to maintain. The polished corridors that once echoed whispers of suspicion now felt like a space I could navigate with quiet confidence. I carried myself differently, not arrogantly, but with a calm assurance born from having faced something that had once seemed insurmountable. Every step through the office, the hum of computers, the soft click of heels on polished floors, reminded me that I had reclaimed control over my life and my narrative, that I made small, deliberate choices to protect my professional space while maintaining my integrity. I was more cautious in interactions, yes, but also more assertive, clear about what was acceptable, unwilling to let anyone's assumptions or jealousy dictate my sense of self. The experience had taught me that strength isn't just about proving yourself to others. It's about knowing your worth even when the world doubts you. I noticed the subtle shift in colleagues' behavior too. There was respect now, a recognition of the perseverance I had shown, though I let that recognition be quiet affirmation rather than a shield I relied on. Outside the office, life regained a sense of normalcy. I walked the city streets with a lighter step, feeling the hum of traffic, the wind on my face, the smell of fresh rain on asphalt, and I realized how much the small, ordinary details had been obscured by weeks of anxiety. I allowed myself to enjoy these moments again, to savor coffee in the morning without a knot in my stomach, to laugh without overthinking, to trust my instincts and judgment. It was a reclamation of peace that had been stolen from me, and I cherished it fiercely. The ordeal had left scars, certainly, reminders that life can be unpredictable, unfair, and even cruel. But it had also forged resilience. I had learned to confront injustice head-on, to trust in my own abilities, and to navigate fear with courage. I knew I would carry these lessons forward, not with bitterness, but with quiet empowerment. I had faced the storm, survived the chaos, and emerged with clarity, self-respect, and the ability to move forward with confidence. I gazed out the office window one late afternoon, sunlight spilling over the city skyline. I felt a calm certainty settle in my chest. I didn't know what challenges awaited me tomorrow, next week, or next year, but I knew that whatever came, I could face it. I had fought for my truth, reclaimed my dignity, and learned that no accusation, no false judgment could ever define who I truly was. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile, not a cautious, fleeting smile, but a genuine one, grounded in the knowledge that I had survived, endured, and grown.